Hey everybody, it's Randy Wright, and this is The Literate Texan. Today, how to read 100 books a year. Now, I don't know what the magic is about 100 books a year, but this is something I do have experience with because last year I read, I believe it was 138 books. Now, to be fair, I spent a lot of time in the hospital last year where I didn't have much else to do but read. And 100 books a year always seems to be my goal. 100 books a year always seems to be the goal that I miss, okay? Usually I read between 50 and 75 books a year. But if you want to read 100 books a year, basically you're looking at a math problem, first of all, followed by a time management project. That's it. It's not complicated. It's not hard. And you know what? Almost anybody can do it if they're willing to put in the time, okay? So, the first thing you need to know or need to figure out if you want to read 100 books a year, we're going to break it down to what you got to do per week, okay? There's 52 weeks in a year. So basically, if you read 2 books a week every week and you took 2 weeks off for vacation, that's 50 weeks. So if you read 2 books a week, you'd hit your goal of 100 books a year. Easy peasy, right? Okay. Well, how long does it take you to read a book? Now, I don't know how many people know or have figured out the average length of time that they spend reading a book. But I'm just going to go with the averages, and I got these averages from Google. So your mileage is going to vary based on which books you choose to read, and it's going to vary based on how fast you read, okay? So, first of all, how long is the average book? And I'm just going to focus on this from a more personal perspective because I'm assuming that the people who watch my channel kind of read like I do and are kind of interested in the same kinds of books that I am. I'm interested in novels mostly, sometimes short story collections. I do read some biographies here and there. I'm not a big fan of most other genres. I'm liable to read a little nonfiction here and there, but maybe not. Not much. I don't read a lot of nonfiction. Let's just say that. Okay, the average novel, according to Google, is 300 pages long. Now, I don't know if I believe that. I think it's probably closer to 350, but I'm just going to go along with Google's estimate of 300, okay? Because I'm using Google's estimate for the other factor that we're going to look at here. How many pages per minute do you read? Okay? How many pages per minute do you read? Okay, so pages per minute or pages per hour? It's pages per hour. How many pages per hour do you read? Okay, so the average person, according to Google, reads about 40 pages per hour. Now, this is going to vary a lot, okay? This is going to vary based on the material that you're reading, for one thing. If you're reading something difficult, it's going to take you longer to read. If you're reading something really easy, it's going to take you a lot less time to read. For example, I'm a fan, not a huge fan, but my daughter likes these books by Emily Henry. They're rom-coms, and they're really entertaining, and I enjoy reading them with her. And occasionally I'll pick up some books from, the Book of the Month Club. And a lot of times the books from the Book of the Month Club are what I would consider really light reading, maybe summer reading or beach reading, whatever. So I can read one of those books at a rate of about 70 pages per hour instead of 40 pages per hour, almost twice as fast. So, and they tend to run around 300 pages, 350 pages. But let's just assume over the course of the year, over 100 books, we're going to go ahead and assume that we're looking at 100 books. It's going to average out to 300 pages per book. It's going to average out to 40 pages per hour. And that's a little slow for me. Normally I read about 50 pages per hour myself. I know other people who read 60 pages per hour. My reading slowed down quite a bit. When I was younger, I could read 100 pages per hour. My retention wasn't the same as it is now. I think I put a lot more thought and care into what I'm reading now. And I would encourage you not to surrender or give up comprehension in exchange for speed or volume. Because, and I don't remember who said this, might have been C.S. Lewis, or it might have been C.S. Lewis quoting someone else smart, but it's not the number of books that you read, it's not the number of books you get through, it's the number of books that get through to you. And for a book to get through to you, I feel like you have to read it closely. And, if you're reading 100 pages an hour, 150 pages an hour, something like that, I suspect that you're not reading very closely. Now, there are people out there who read really, really fast. and there are legitimate speed readers out there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm skeptical of most people who claim to be speed readers, and I'm always reminded of that Woody Allen joke. And I know a lot of people don't like Woody Allen anymore, but I think his early jokes especially were very funny. But he said, yeah, I took a speed reading course this summer and I read War and Peace. Yeah, it's about Russia. So, all right, if you're going to read 2 books a week, okay, you're going to read 600 pages a week. And 600 pages a week divided by 40 pages per hour is 15 hours a week. Basically, you're committing yourself to a part-time job. 15 hours a week is basically a part-time job. And you can divvy that 15 hours a week up however you like. You can do 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday. You can do 2 hours a day or a little over 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know what? You can not read it all Monday through Friday, and you can read 7.5 hours on Saturday and finish a book, and 7.5 hours on Sunday and finish another book. But yeah, you're looking at an average of 15 hours per week. Now, if you're reading hard stuff, if you're reading Shakespeare, for example, or if you're reading Charles Dickens even, you're going to read a little bit slower. You might read as slow as 20 pages per hour, and you'll just account for that as you go along, okay? But track that stuff if you care about how many books you read per year. And I don't know how much you should care. I think it's okay to have a reading goal per year. I think 100 books per year is probably as good as any other reading goal. I think it's probably better than 200 books a year, which would require 30 hours a week. 200 books a year, 30 hours. 30 hours a week is a lot of time to commit to reading if you have a full-time job or any kind of life. I know Steve Donahue is a book critic, and all he does is read, or that's what he claims. All he does is read round the clock, and he doesn't sleep very much too. As a result, he winds up reading something like 1,500 books a year. That's a lot of books to read per year. 100 books per year is pretty impressive for most people. I think if you read 1 book per year, you're in the top 50% of Americans, of adult Americans, because 50% of adult Americans don't read a book at all every year. So if you read just 1 book, you're already in the top half, which is, impressive enough to suit me. The thing is, who are you trying to impress with how many books you want to read every year? I don't know, man. I don't have a problem with playing a game where you're trying to impress other people. Some people seem to have a problem with that. Some people even seem to feel pressure from BookTube to read more. But you know what? You're an adult, man. Peer pressure is for high schoolers. Read however much you want or don't want. If you don't care how many books you read per year, that's totally cool, man. If you do care and you set that number at 100, that's cool. If you set it at 150, that's cool. If you set it at 50, that's cool too, man. Reading's kind of a solitary hobby. And, there's no wrong way to read. I was entertaining a new friend the other day. He's a buddy of mine. And he was over here with another friend of mine who's been my friend much longer. And if you come to my house, it doesn't take long to realize that I'm a reader. And that I have a pretty broad taste of a pretty broad range of books that suit my taste. Although you will notice that it's mostly fiction just from looking at the books on my walls. But my new friend didn't say anything about it. But when he went to breakfast with my old friend, they had breakfast this morning, and my old friend stopped by to tell me that my new friend was a little scared to tell me that he's a reader too. He was afraid that I would look down my nose at him because he only reads Louis L'Amour novels. Huh. Well, let me tell you, I got a whole stack of Louis L'Amour over here, and this is on my TBR list for the coming month. June on the Range. June on the Range is one of my favorite events. And if you like Louis L'Amour, I think you're going to have a hard time not liking the Westerns of Larry McMurtry. So, I'll talk with my new friend and say, hey, buddy, I love Louis L'Amour. And if you ever want to try something a little different, just a little bit different that you're probably going to really love, man, I'd love to read something by Larry McMurtry with you. And maybe not necessarily an 1,100 monster like Lonesome Dove. Maybe we'll read Anything for Billy, which is, I don't know, to the best of my recollection, about 300 pages long. It's about Billy the Kid. It's a really great book. So what else do you talk about in a video about how to read 100 books a year? Well, let's talk about motivation, okay? And I made a whole video about how to motivate yourself to read more. And I think for the most part, if you're having a problem with motivation, reading, there's a couple of things going on. One is maybe you just don't need to read as much or don't want to read as much as you think you do, okay? 15 hours a week's a lot of time for some people, not necessarily for others, 15 hours a week would have been a long time for me when my kids were smaller, but my kids are all grown. My twins are 22. At 22 years old, they're not really hanging out with dad very often. They're out there inventing their lives. They're creating their lives and their new lifestyles, and they're deciding who their friends are going to be, what their peer group's going to be. So they're spending time with those people. They already know me. So yeah, I see them as often as I can, and I try to encourage them to spend time with me. They just don't spend as much time with me as they used to, which frees up a lot of time for reading. So, the advice that I gave in my video about how to motivate yourself to read, I had several tips. One of them is to read books that you want rather than books that you think you should read. Okay? If you're reading books that you want, you're not going to lack for motivation to read because you're reading what you want to read. By definition, why do you need motivation to do something that you already want to do? If you want to do it, you're motivated. That's the definition of motivation. If you're not motivated, it means there's something you're trying to read that you don't necessarily want to read. I'm taking on some new book projects personally. One of them, and I'm not sure when I'll get to it, is to read the complete Charles Dickens. He wrote 14 and a half novels and then some literary stuff, some short stories, some essays, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to read all of them. And I'll probably make that a project one of these years, maybe next year. I don't know. It's definitely not going to be a project this year because I'm committed to a lot of other reading events. So yeah, think about that. The other thing is, let's say that you generally read quite a bit and suddenly you don't want to spend as much time reading, but you're still reading stuff that you like and want to read. You just can't get up the energy or the want to or the gumption to sit down and do the reading that you want to do. Well, that probably means some other area of your life's out of balance. So figure out what it is and fix it. Maybe, your white blood cells are low or something. Who knows? Maybe you're diabetic and haven't been diagnosed. Go get your physical. Drink more water, eat healthier, get more exercise. Whatever it is that you need to do to make yourself well enough to stay motivated is going to help you read 100 books a year. And so, what else have I got for you? Where are you going to find 15 hours a week? Well, a lot of people swear up and down there's no way they can find 15 hours a week to read, but that's just nonsense for 99% of you, okay? There's 168 hours a week for me, just like there are for you, But, most people, they don't generally spend a lot of time at breakfast socializing or talking to other people. I know some people do, but you can always read at breakfast. 20 minutes at breakfast every day adds up to an hour and 20 minutes over the course of a week. That's a significant percentage of the 15 hours that you're shooting for each week. If you manage to read for 20 minutes at each meal, that's an hour a day. Okay. I know that when I worked for a living, I still work for a living. I just don't work for the man. But I worked with a guy. He was brilliant. He was one of the best employees we had. He was a salesman, and he was one of our top salesmen. But he didn't eat lunch, which is probably how he maintained that girlish figure. But what he did was he smoked pot and read Agatha Christie novels in his car. And don't ask me how I know any of this. But yeah, and he got a lot of reading done every year and stuff. I don't know. I don't mess around with that sort of thing anymore. But when I was younger, if I were high on pot, I probably wouldn't get very many pages in at lunchtime. But he seemed to do all right. I don't know. I think Agatha Christie novels, more than most, need attention. So anyway, here's some bad advice about how to read 100 books a year. Okay? Learning how to speed read. I think for most people, learning how to speed read is bad advice. And that's going to be controversial with some people who watch this video. And that's cool. I encourage you to make a response video and talk about why you love speed reading so much. But I think for most people, the idea isn't necessarily to get more reading in. It's to enjoy your reading more. So, if I'm flying through books at 90 miles an hour and not really picking up on the nuances, then I'm not getting out of the book everything that I could get out of the book. I prefer a slower, more close reading approach. I don't think I'm going to hit my 100 books this year either. But yeah, so that's bad advice. Other advice would be to read shorter books. Okay. Actually, that's not terrible advice, but I don't think you should make a steady diet of short books your goal just so that you can hit 100 books a year. That being said, I'm going to give you some shorter books to read to give you a jump start on this 100 books a year goal, okay? And so, what are these shorter books that I'm going to give you to read, okay? Animal Farm is short, okay? Less than 150 pages, by George Orwell. Classic, easy to read. The Great Gatsby, you can finish very quickly. It's a very short book. I don't think it's even 200 pages. I think it comes in at just under 200 pages. Great Gatsby's a wonderful novel. I reread it every year. The Death of Ivan Illich is I've seen it in collections of short stories, but I've also seen it published as a book unto itself. The Death of Ivan Illich is excellent. It's definitely something that's worth reading and rereading. Those 3 books right there, I'll give you a nice little head start this year in your goal of reading 100 books. And you can easily find YouTube videos and websites that'll give you lists of books that are short but still really good. And you can take advantage of those anytime. I know one year I was concerned about my numbers. I cared, that just happened to be the game I was playing that year. And, if you probably don't know much about my philosophy in life, but my philosophy in life is that life is a big game and it doesn't last very long. Okay. As Steve Donahue, who I mentioned earlier, likes to point out, you're here for about 5 minutes, maybe less than that, and then you're gone. In the grand scheme of things, that's true. So, so you got your big game that you're playing over the course of your life, but then you've got all these little mini games during your life that you play. And all of them have their little rules, and all of them have their little strategies. Like right now, for example, I've got a wound that won't heal. And my wound care specialist is negotiating with my insurance company right now for a particular treatment that they're afraid the insurance company might not pay for, but it's what I need. So I'm facing a situation where I may have to go head to head with the insurance company and negotiate with them and convince them to pay for something that they're initially going to say no to. There's a strategy for that. There are people who are more successful at getting what they want from a health insurance company than others. That's a game that you can play, okay? And if you reframe things as games in your life, not only can you become better at them without feeling like you're putting in just tremendous amounts of work and effort that just destroy you at the end of the day, but also it just makes things more fun. So, and like I say, you can apply this mini game idea, this mini game concept to just about anything in your life. I have a date tonight. That's a mini game that I'm going to play with her. And she's playing a mini game too. And, I'm looking forward to it. We're going to have Italian food and watch a movie. But one of the things about these mini games is deciding what constitutes success for yourself. I do like reading goals of something like 100 books a year because your definition of success for that game is pretty clear and straightforward. You either read 100 books this year or you didn't. So that's what I have to say about reading 100 books a year or how to read 100 books a year. If you've got some input into this, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I know that people have lots of different opinions about, setting reading goals and whether that's toxic or not. And I'm interested in all those opinions. I don't see a lot of harm in it. Some people will say reading's not a competitive activity. Well, no, it doesn't have to be, but it can be if you want it to be. And that's okay too, as long as it's not making you unhappy. Main thing is, try to be as happy as you can. And there's a couple of additional things about being happy that I want to share with you. Stay sexy, that'll make you happy. And another thing that'll make you happy is stay hydrated. Man, because I'm going to tell you, a quick route to unhappiness is dehydration. I'll be back with more videos soon. I want to thank you for watching.